I'm Connie, 57, and life has taught me that appearances can be deceiving. After my husband died, I quietly built a $75 million real estate empire that nobody knows about, not even my son Thomas. Now, he's marrying Stephanie, a woman from a wealthy family who treats me like I'm beneath them. As the wedding approaches, I've made a decision. I'll keep my wealth a secret to see who truly respects me for who I am, not what I have. If you're watching from somewhere with family drama, hit subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're from. Let me take you back to how this all started. Life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. I grew up in a middle-class family in Minnesota, where I learned the value of hard work and honesty from my parents, who owned a small hardware store. I met Robert during my sophomore year of college, and we fell in love almost instantly. He was studying engineering, and I was pursuing a degree in education. We married right after graduation, and I became a high school English teacher, while he worked for a construction company. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. Robert earned a good salary, and we lived modestly in a 3-bedroom house in a nice neighborhood. We saved what we could and splurged occasionally on vacations. Our greatest joy came when our son Thomas was born. He was our only child, and we poured all our love into raising him. Life was simple and happy until 12 years ago, when Robert complained about chest pain one evening after dinner. I thought it was just indigestion, but within an hour, he was on the floor, gasping for breath. The ambulance came quickly, but it was too late. A massive heart attack took my husband at just 49 years old. The grief was overwhelming. I remember sitting in our living room, surrounded by casserole dishes from well-meaning neighbors, wondering how I would possibly go on without him. Thomas was 18 then, just starting college, and I had to be strong for him while feeling like my world had collapsed. A month after the funeral, while going through Robert's papers, I discovered something unexpected. He had a life insurance policy I didn't know about, along with several investment accounts. Together, they were worth just over $2 million. I was shocked. We had always discussed our finances openly, but somehow he had managed to save and invest without telling me, perhaps wanting to surprise me someday with financial security. This discovery came right as the housing market was crashing in 2008. Properties were being foreclosed everywhere, and prices were at historic lows. With my teaching salary and now this unexpected windfall, I decided to take a risk. I bought my first foreclosed property, renovated it, and sold it for a 40% profit 6 months later. Something clicked in me. I discovered I had a talent for seeing potential in distressed properties. I took a leave of absence from teaching to focus on real estate full-time. One property became 3, then 10, then dozens. I formed a company, hired a small team, and expanded into commercial real estate. Within 5 years, my net worth had grown to $20 million. Today, 12 years after Robert's death, my company manages properties worth $75 million. Throughout all this success, I kept my growing wealth private. I still live in the same house Robert and I bought together. I drive a 10-year-old sedan. I don't wear expensive jewelry or designer clothes. It's not that I'm miserly. I simply found that wealth didn't change what made me happy. I donate to causes I care about and help people privately. Thomas and I remained close after Robert died. He leaned on me during his grief, and I supported him through college. He studied business and initially showed interest in joining my growing company. We talked about him taking over someday. Those were happy years with Sunday dinners and holiday traditions. we maintained even without Robert. Everything changed when Thomas met Stephanie 2 years ago. He was working at a marketing firm in the city, and she was the daughter of a wealthy family who owned a chain of luxury hotels. From their first date, I could see he was smitten. Stephanie was beautiful, sophisticated, and connected to a social circle Thomas had always admired from afar. As their relationship progressed, I saw Thomas less and less. Our Sunday dinners became monthly, then occasional. When they did visit, Thomas seemed different, more concerned with appearances, dropping names of exclusive restaurants and clubs. Stephanie would glance around my modest home with barely concealed disdain, making comments like, "This place has such character." Thomas stopped asking about my business. When I mentioned a new property acquisition, his eyes would glaze over, and he'd quickly change the subject to their latest trip or some celebrity they'd met at a charity gala. I tried to connect with Stephanie, but she maintained a polite distance, treating me like someone from a different world. After dating for just 1 year, Thomas announced they were engaged. I was taken aback by the speed of it all, but tried to be supportive. "I'm happy if you're happy," I told him, though privately, I worried about the changes I'd seen in him. Was he marrying Stephanie because he loved her, or because he loved the lifestyle and status she represented? I kept these concerns to myself and determined to embrace Stephanie as the daughter I never had. I had no idea how challenging that would prove to be, or that the upcoming wedding would reveal truths about my son I wasn't prepared to face. The first real disappointment came when Thomas and Stephanie visited to discuss wedding plans. They arrived at my house in her shiny, new luxury SUV, and I noticed Stephanie wipe her hands on a tissue after touching my front gate. "Mom, we have exciting news," Thomas announced as they settled on my living room sofa. Stephanie's eyes darted around the room, lingering on the family photos and the slightly worn armchair that had been Robert's favorite. "The wedding will be at the Howard estate," Stephanie said, referring to her family's sprawling property in the countryside. "Daddy insisted. It's where all Howard women have been married for 3 generations. "Oh," I said, trying to hide my surprise. I had assumed, perhaps naively, that I would be consulted about the wedding location. "That sounds lovely." "It's magnificent," Thomas added, squeezing Stephanie's hand. "Wait until you see it, Mom. The gardens alone are worth the trip." They proceeded to outline their plans. 500 guests, a weekend of events, including a welcome dinner, the ceremony reception, and farewell brunch. As they talked, I noticed they referred to Stephanie's parents' wishes and the Howard family tradition, but never asked for my input. When Stephanie pulled out the draft invitation to show me, I noticed my name listed simply as mother of the groom, with no special role mentioned. Stephanie's mother was matron of honor, and her father would not only walk her down the aisle, but also host the reception. "What role would you like me to play?" I asked carefully. Stephanie and Thomas exchanged glances. "Well, you'll be introduced during the ceremony, of course," Stephanie said. "And you'll be seated at the family table for the reception. That's the traditional role for the groom's mother." I nodded, swallowing my disappointment. Robert would have been Thomas's best man if he were alive. Shouldn't I have some special part to honor that absence? The conversation turned to the budget, and Stephanie casually mentioned that her parents were covering most expenses since they had specific expectations for their only daughter's wedding. "I'd like to contribute," I offered. "I've been saving for Thomas's wedding since he was born." Thomas looked uncomfortable. "That's not necessary, Mom. The Howards want to handle it." "But I insist," I pressed. "It's important to me." Stephanie smiled thinly. No offense, Connie, but we want a really elegant affair. The band alone costs more than most people's entire weddings. We wouldn't want you to strain yourself financially. I felt my cheeks burn at the condescension in her tone. If only she knew I could buy their entire wedding venue 10 times over without blinking. I understand, I said quietly, deciding to let it go. A week later, I joined Thomas and Stephanie for shopping for my mother-of-the-groom dress. I had looked forward to this imagining a special bonding experience. Instead, it turned into 3 hours of humiliation, as Stephanie rejected every dress I liked. "That color washes you out," she said about a blue dress I admired. "That style is a bit mature," she commented about another. When I found a lovely emerald green gown that the boutique owner said complimented my eyes, Stephanie shook her head decisively. "Green clashes with our color scheme. Plus, it's a bit loud for what we had in mind. The groom's mother should be elegant, but understated." Thomas stood by, offering no support, occasionally checking his phone, as if bored by the whole process. Finally, they selected a beige dress that made me look washed out and invisible. Exactly what I suspected Stephanie wanted. The following week, I received an invitation to Stephanie's bridal shower. It arrived 3 days before the event, clearly an afterthought. When I arrived at the upscale restaurant, I discovered that every other guest had received their invitations weeks earlier and had coordinated their gifts from an exclusive registry. My hastily purchased crystal vase seemed inadequate next to their monogrammed linens and custom artwork. Stephanie's mother, Margaret, barely acknowledged my presence, seating me at a table with distant cousins who talked around me rather than to me. When Stephanie opened my gift, she managed a tight smile and a quick, "Thank you, Connie," before moving on to more impressive presents. I maintained my dignity and pleasant demeanor throughout, even as I felt increasingly like an outsider at my own son's wedding festivities. I kept reminding myself that this was about Thomas's happiness, not my feelings. The final straw came when Thomas called 2 days before the rehearsal dinner. "Mom, I wanted to check if you were planning to bring anything to the rehearsal dinner." "I thought I might make my apple pie," I said. "You always said it was your favorite." There was an uncomfortable pause. "Actually, the event is being catered by a Michelin-starred chef. Stephanie's parents arranged it. Maybe it's better if you don't bring anything homemade." After we hung up, I overheard a conversation through the phone that Thomas had failed to properly disconnect. "Did you tell her not to bring that awful pie?" Stephanie's voice asked. "Yes, it's handled," Thomas replied. "Good. I can't believe how embarrassing your mother is sometimes. Does she not understand the kind of wedding we're having?" Instead of defending me, my son laughed nervously. I know. Don't worry, she'll behave." As I set the phone down, something hardened inside me. I had raised Thomas to be kind and respectful values that seemed to have evaporated in Stephanie's presence. That's when I decided I would attend this wedding, but I would keep my financial success completely secret. I wanted to see who would treat me with respect based on my character alone, not my bank account. The wedding venue took my breath away as I drove through the iron gates of the Howard estate. Manicured gardens stretched in every direction, and the historic mansion loomed impressively against the blue sky. Luxury cars filled the circular driveway, and uniformed staff directed arriving guests. I parked my 10-year-old sedan between a Bentley and a Mercedes, acutely aware of the contrast. The valet looked at my car with barely concealed disdain before handing me a claim ticket. Taking a deep breath, I straightened my simple travel outfit and wheeled my modest suitcase toward the entrance. "You must be Thomas's mother," a cool voice said. I turned to see Margaret Howard Stephanie's mother, assessing me from head to toe. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her designer outfit impeccable. "I'm Margaret Howard. Welcome to our home. Thank you for having me," I replied, warmly extending my hand. "Your property is beautiful." She shook my hand briefly. "Yes, it's been in William's family for generations. The staff will show you to your room in the East Wing. The main family is staying in the central part of the house, of course." The dismissal in her tone was unmistakable. I wasn't considered main family. "Of course," I echoed, maintaining my smile. "How thoughtful of you to include me in the accommodations." A young staff member led me to a small but elegant room at the far end of the East Wing, explaining apologetically that the larger rooms had been assigned to priority family members. I thanked him and began unpacking, determined not to let these slights affect my mood. At the rehearsal dinner that evening, I discovered I was seated at a table far from the main party, with distant relatives of the bride, who seemed confused about who I was. The seating arrangement placed the Howards and their close friends at the central table, where Thomas sat, beaming beside Stephanie, occasionally glancing my way, but making no move to include me. During the cocktail hour before dinner, I overheard a conversation between Stephanie's father, William, and another man. "We've done quite well with the guest list," William said. "Managed to get the governor and the Andersons. Those are the guests that really matter for networking." The other man nodded. "And the groom's side? Anyone significant there?" William shrugged dismissively. "Teachers and suburban types mostly. No one of consequence. But Thomas is a good match for Stephanie otherwise. Ambitious young man willing to learn our ways." I slipped away before they noticed me, a hollow feeling growing in my chest. Was that how they saw Thomas? As someone who needed to learn their ways? And was that how Thomas now saw himself later? I approached the wedding planner to introduce myself, hoping to clarify the next day's schedule. "Hello, I'm Connie Thomas's mother." She looked up from her clipboard with a distracted expression. "Are you with the catering staff? Service entrances are around the back." "No," I said, my cheeks burning. "I'm the mother of the groom." "Oh." Her eyes widened in embarrassment. "I'm so sorry. I just assumed." "Well, the mother-son dance will be after the father-daughter dance, and you'll be announced after the bridal party. Just make sure to be ready when we call for you." As she hurried away, I heard Stephanie's Aunt Patricia speaking loudly to another woman. "Did you see what Thomas's mother is wearing? I suppose it's the best she could afford. But really, couldn't her son have helped her find something more appropriate? Such an awkward addition to the family." I pretended not to hear, focusing instead on my water glass and willing my eyes not to tear up. Throughout my life, I'd faced judgments and overcome obstacles, but being treated as an embarrassment at my only child's wedding cut deeper than I had anticipated. The evening wore on, and I found myself increasingly isolated. Then someone pulled out the chair beside me. "Mind if I join you? These formal events can be exhaustingly pretentious." I looked up to see a man about my age, with kind eyes and an easy smile. "Alexander Howard," he introduced himself. "Stephanie's black sheep uncle. You must be Thomas's mother." "Connie," I confirmed, grateful for the friendly face. "And yes, apparently, I'm the black sheep of this gathering, too." He laughed. "I noticed they've exiled you to the Siberia table with me. My brother William has always been obsessed with status and connections. Please don't take it personally." We chatted comfortably for the next hour, and I found myself relaxing for the first time since arriving. Alexander was a professor of literature who cared little for the family's focus on wealth and prestige. His genuine interest in my experiences as a teacher was refreshing amid the superficiality surrounding us. The moment of warmth was short-lived, however. The next morning, I received a call from the wedding coordinator about the day's schedule. Following her instructions, I arrived at what I thought was the designated meeting point for family photos, only to find an empty room. After waiting 15 minutes, I received a text from the coordinator. "Sorry, miscommunication. Bride's family photos are happening now in the rose garden. Groom's family after ceremony." When I made my way to the rose garden, I found a full photo session in progress, with Thomas positioned among the Howards, like he already belonged to their family. Stephanie spotted me hovering uncertainly at the edge of the garden and frowned. "What are you doing here?" she hissed when the photographer paused to adjust his equipment. "These are family photos." "I am family," I said quietly. "I'm Thomas's mother." "You know what I mean," she replied impatiently. "These are for our side. You'll be in the photos after the ceremony." Thomas approached, looking uncomfortable. "Mom, there was a change of plans. Sorry about that. We'll get photos together later, okay?" He guided me away from the group, speaking in low tones. "Listen, Mom, I need you to try harder to fit in here. The Howards are important people, and this weekend means a lot for my future. Can you just, I don't know, try not to stand out so much, for me?" As he rejoined Stephanie and her family, leaving me standing alone, I felt something shift in my perception of my son. The boy I had raised to value character over status seemed to have disappeared, replaced by someone I barely recognized. And for the first time, I wondered if keeping my wealth secret was not just a test for the Howards, but for Thomas as well. The wedding day dawned bright and clear, a perfect spring day that contrasted sharply with the storm brewing inside me. I dressed carefully in the beige dress that had been deemed acceptable, applied subtle makeup, and arranged my hair in a classic updo. Looking in the mirror, I hardly recognized the subdued woman staring back at me. A knock at my door revealed a young assistant who had been sent to direct me to the ceremony. "We're seating guests now, if you'd like to follow me," she said brightly. "I thought family members would be gathering separately," I replied, confused. "According to traditional protocol, the mother of the groom should be escorted to her seat just before the ceremony begins." "Oh," she looked embarrassed. "I was just told to bring you to the ceremony area." Following her through the gardens, I was surprised when she led me not to a family gathering area, but directly to the rows of white chairs where guests were already seated. Even more shocking, she directed me not to the front row, where family typically sits, but to a chair in the fourth row, far off to the side. "There must be a mistake," I said firmly. "I'm the groom's mother." The young woman looked at her seating chart in confusion. "This is the assignment I was given. Let me check with the wedding planner." The planner approached moments later, her professional smile not reaching her eyes. "Mrs. Baker, this is the seating arrangement approved by the bride. The front rows are reserved for immediate family and VIP guests." "I am immediate family," I insisted, keeping my voice calm despite the hurt building inside me. "I understand, but these are the bride's instructions. Perhaps Thomas didn't communicate the arrangements clearly to you." I scanned the front rows and spotted Stephanie's extended family, several people I recognized as business associates of her father, and even what appeared to be local celebrities. But there was no place for the woman who had given birth to and raised the groom. Rather than create a scene, I took my assigned seat, feeling the pitying glances of nearby guests who had overheard the exchange. My eyes searched for Thomas, hoping he would notice the slight and correct it, but he was nowhere to be seen, presumably waiting with the groomsmen. The ceremony began with an elaborate procession. Stephanie's young cousins scattered rose petals, followed by 6 bridesmaids in designer gowns. Thomas entered from the side with his groomsmen, all friends from college, and his new social circle. My heart ached as I realized I knew none of them well. Where were his childhood friends? I had watched grow up alongside him. Throughout the ceremony, Thomas never looked in my direction. He stared adoringly at Stephanie as she glided down the aisle on her father's arm of vision in an obviously couture gown that probably cost more than most people's cars. The minister spoke of joining 2 families, but as I sat isolated in my distant row, it was clear that only one family was being celebrated today. When Thomas recited his vows, promising to cherish Stephanie and honor her family's traditions, I wondered if he remembered the values his father and I had taught him about what truly matters in life. After the ceremony, guests moved to an enormous tent for the reception. I followed the crowd, searching for my name card among the elaborately decorated tables. Again, I discovered I had been placed far from the main family table, seated instead with distant acquaintances who seemed uncomfortable with my presence. "Aren't you the groom's mother?" one elderly woman asked in confusion. "Why aren't you at the family table?" I manufactured a smile. "The seating is quite tight at the main tables. I'm happy to get to know new people." William Howard's toast was the first indignity of the reception. Standing tall with a champagne flute, he spoke about welcoming Thomas to our caliber of family, and how pleased they were that Stephanie found someone willing to embrace the Howard legacy and responsibilities. Not once did he acknowledge me or Thomas's upbringing. I had prepared a short toast, as is customary, for the groom's mother, but was never invited to speak. Instead, the microphone passed from Stephanie's father to her mother to her maid of honor, all Howard-approved voices celebrating the couple. During dinner, I overheard Stephanie's cousin, Amanda, speaking loudly at the next table. "Can you believe Thomas's background? His mother is a retired teacher from some public school. Stephanie really is elevating him into better circles." The waitstaff seemed to notice my second-class status as well, serving me last and forgetting to refill my water glass. When I politely requested more water, the server appeared surprised that I had noticed the oversight. After the meal, the photographer gathered family members for formal portraits. I stood up, ready to join, but Stephanie's voice stopped me. "Actually, Connie, could you step out of this one? We're trying to achieve a balanced look, and the colors aren't quite working." I looked down at the beige dress that Stephanie herself had approved and understood the real message I didn't fit their aesthetic vision. Thomas, standing behind his new wife, avoided my gaze, his silence an implicit endorsement of my exclusion. That silence hurt more than any of the Howards' deliberate slights. The son I had raised, who once stood up for a bullied classmate in elementary school and volunteered at homeless shelters in high school, now stood by while his mother was treated as an inconvenience. During the dancing portion of the evening, I retreated to a quiet corner, watching as Thomas moved confidently among his new social circle. Stephanie's grandmother approached where I sat, peering at me through narrowed eyes. "You know," she said without preamble, "some people simply don't belong in certain settings. My granddaughter has a position to maintain." Before I could respond to this blatant rudeness, a hand appeared, offering me a glass of champagne. "I thought you might need this," said a kind voice. I looked up to see Jake, one of the groomsmen, who had spoken briefly with me during the rehearsal dinner. "Thank you," I said gratefully, as Stephanie's grandmother huffed and moved away. "I've known Thomas since college," Jake said, taking the seat beside me. "He always spoke so highly of you, of how you supported him after his dad died. I don't understand what's happening today." His kindness almost undid my composure. I excused myself to find the restroom, needing a moment alone to gather my strength. In the elegant powder room, I finally allowed myself a moment of grief, silent tears falling, as I confronted the possibility that I had lost my son to a world that valued appearance over substance. As I dabbed at my eyes, a young woman in catering attire entered carrying fresh hand towels. She noticed my tears and paused. "Are you all right, ma'am?" she asked gently. "Just wedding emotions." I managed, trying to smile. She arranged the towels and then hesitated. "I'm sorry if this is out of line, but I saw how they've been treating you. I'm Sophia, by the way. I work with the catering team." "Connie," I replied, "Thomas's mother." "I know," she said, surprising me. "I overheard the bride talking about you in here earlier. It wasn't kind. For what it's worth, my mother raised me alone, too, working multiple jobs. People who judge others based on money or status aren't worth your tears." Her simple empathy touched me deeply. We chatted briefly about her dreams of starting her own catering business someday, and I found myself more comfortable with this stranger than with most of the wedding guests. As I left the restroom with renewed determination to maintain my dignity, I overheard Stephanie speaking to Thomas in a quiet alcove, not realizing I was passing by. "Once we're back from the honeymoon, we won't have to deal with your mother much," she was saying. "We'll be too busy with the right social connections, maybe holidays. But even then, we can limit it to quick visits." I didn't hear Thomas's response as I moved quickly away, but his failure to object told me everything I needed to know about where I stood in my son's new life. The final event of the reception was the family speeches, which the coordinator announced would take place before the cake cutting. I watched as Stephanie's family members took turns at the microphone, each speech more self-congratulatory than the last. Margaret Howard, elegant in her designer gown, spoke at length about the joining of equal families and the continuation of the Howard legacy through this perfect union. She thanked various distinguished guests, by name acknowledging their importance, but never once mentioned me. When Thomas took the microphone, I felt a flicker of hope that he might publicly acknowledge his roots, might thank me for the years of love and support. Instead, he spent most of his speech praising Stephanie's family for welcoming me into your incredible world, and thanking his new father-in-law for showing me what true success looks like. His only reference to me came at the end, a brief, "and thanks to my mom for being here today." No mention of how I had raised him alone after his father died. No acknowledgement of the sacrifices I had made for his education and happiness. In that moment, it became clear that Thomas had chosen to rewrite his history, erasing the parts that didn't fit with his new narrative. As guests mingled after the speeches, I overheard Stephanie, now several champagnes into the evening, speaking loudly to her bridesmaids. "Thank God he doesn't take after his mother," she laughed. "Can you imagine? We'd be living in some dreary suburban house, talking about school district ratings instead of planning our yacht trips." The women laughed, unaware that I stood just behind a nearby column. Something inside me finally broke. I had maintained my dignity throughout 2 days of humiliation, but hearing my son's new wife mock not just me, but the life Thomas and I had shared was the final straw. I decided to leave the reception early. There seemed little point in staying where I was so clearly unwanted. I quietly gathered my evening bag and wrap, intending to slip away without fuss. But as I made my way toward the exit, Stephanie spotted me. "Leaving so soon?" she called, loud enough to draw attention. Her tone was challenging, her smile brittle with champagne confidence. "Yes," I replied calmly. "It's been a long day. Congratulations again." "You won't stay for the cake?" she pressed, moving closer, something confrontational in her stance. "Or is our party not exciting enough compared to grading papers and watching TV alone?" Several guests nearby fell silent, watching the exchange with uncomfortable expressions. "Stephanie," I said quietly, "today is your day. I wouldn't want to distract from your celebration." "Nobody really wanted you here anyway," she said, her voice slurring slightly. "Thomas was just fulfilling an obligation. You don't fit in our world." I stood very still, aware of the watching eyes, including Thomas, who had now noticed the confrontation and was approaching with an alarmed expression. For the first time that weekend, I allowed myself to speak with complete honesty. "You're right that I don't fit in your world," I acknowledged. "But before you decide that's a failing on my part, you might consider whether your world, with its judgments based on wealth and status rather than character, is one worth fitting into." Stephanie's face flushed with anger. "How dare you? Do you know who my family is?" "I know exactly who your family is," I replied evenly. "And more importantly, I know who I am. I'm a woman who raised a son to value kindness, integrity, and respect for all people, regardless of their bank accounts." I had hoped those lessons would last, but perhaps I was mistaken. William Howard appeared, placing a proprietary hand on my arm and steering me away from the growing scene. "Let's calm down," he said in a low voice. "There's no need for unpleasantness." He guided me toward a quiet corner, reached into his jacket, and pulled out a checkbook. "I think we all want this weekend to go smoothly," he said, uncapping a fountain pen. "Perhaps a contribution toward your travel expenses would help ease any discomfort you've experienced." I stared at him in disbelief as he began writing a check. "Are you trying to pay me off?" "Consider it a gesture of goodwill," he replied smoothly. "Say $5,000, a nice sum for someone in your position." I had built a real estate empire worth $75 million through hard work, intelligence, and integrity. I had negotiated with billionaires and stood my ground with corporate lawyers. And now, this man thought he could buy my silence with what amounted to pocket change in my world. "Mr. Howard," I said, my voice steel beneath its softness, "there isn't enough money in your account to purchase my dignity. Keep your check and your condescension." Thomas finally reached us as, his expression a mixture of embarrassment and anger. "Mom, what's going on? Are you causing a scene at my wedding?" The fact that he immediately assumed I was the problem, despite Stephanie's public rudeness, told me everything. "No, Thomas," I replied sadly. "I'm simply leaving a place where I'm not welcome. I had hoped you might remember the values your father and I taught you, but it seems those memories have been replaced by new priorities." "Don't bring Dad into this," he said tersely. "Things are different now. I have a different life." "Yes," I agreed. "You certainly do. But you've forgotten who raised you, who loved you unconditionally, who taught you right from wrong. The Thomas I raised would never have stood by while his mother was treated like an unwelcome stranger. Something flickered in his eyes, shame perhaps, or recognition, but it was quickly suppressed. "I think it's best if you go," he said finally. "You're clearly upset and not thinking clearly. We can talk after the honeymoon." I looked at my son standing there in his expensive suit beside his new father-in-law and felt a profound sense of loss. "Goodbye, Thomas. I hope you find happiness in your choices." As I walked to my car, tears finally flowing freely, I reflected on the day's events. The wedding had indeed been a test, but not just for the Howards. It had been a test for Thomas as well, and he had failed it completely. The question now was what to do with this painful knowledge. Back at my hotel room, I sat on the edge of the bed, physically and emotionally exhausted. My phone showed several missed calls from Alexander Stephanie's uncle, who had been kind to me at the rehearsal dinner. I texted him briefly that I was fine, but needed some time alone. Then the hotel desk called. "Ms. Baker, the florist, has been trying to reach you about delivery issues for tomorrow's brunch. Apparently, they need approval for some substitutions." Of course, no one had informed me about floral arrangements for the post-wedding brunch, but in that moment, a plan began forming in my mind. Perhaps it was time for one final test and one final lesson before I determined what my relationship with Thomas would be going forward. "Please tell them I'll handle it first thing in the morning," I told the desk clerk. Then I made several calls of my own setting in motion, a revelation that would change everything. The morning after the wedding dawned clear and bright. Instead of the casual sundress I had packed for the farewell brunch, I dressed in a tailored designer suit that I had asked my assistant to deliver overnight. It was one of the few luxury items I owned, reserved for major business negotiations. As I entered the brunch venue, an elegant garden pavilion on the Howard estate, I was aware of confused looks from the wedding guests. Gone was the invisible woman in beige. In her place stood someone who carried herself with unmistakable confidence and authority. Margaret and William Howard greeted me with cool politeness, clearly surprised by my return after the previous evening's confrontation. "We didn't expect to see you this morning," Margaret said, her tone suggesting she wished I had stayed away. "I wouldn't miss the opportunity to properly celebrate my son's marriage," I replied with a serene smile. Thomas and Stephanie arrived 30 minutes late, looking tired from the previous night's festivities. Thomas froze when he saw me, clearly expecting me to have left town already. Stephanie's expression shifted from surprise to wariness. "Mom, I didn't think you'd be here," Thomas said as he approached. "About last night. We can discuss that later," I said calmly. "This is still your celebration weekend." Precisely on schedule, a staff member approached our group with a stack of newspapers. "Mr. Howard, the business sections you requested," she said, handing them to William. I had timed everything perfectly. William opened the financial paper and stopped staring at the headline on the second page. "Baker Properties acquires Downtown Tower in $75 million deal." Beneath the headline was a photo of me shaking hands with the mayor at the previous month's charity gala, identified as Constance Baker, CEO of Baker Properties, whose real estate holdings now exceed $75 million. As William's eyes widened in shock, my phone rang. I answered it on speaker, as I had instructed my assistant to call at this exact moment. "Ms. Baker, I'm sorry to interrupt your son's wedding weekend, but the board needs your approval on the final terms for the Riverside Development acquisition," my assistant said, her voice clear in the sudden silence around me. "Tell them I approve the terms as discussed." The full $75 million transfer can proceed on Monday, I replied calmly before ending the call. The expressions around me were priceless. Stephanie's mouth had fallen open in shock. Her parents looked as though they'd been slapped. And Thomas, my son, stared at me with a mixture of confusion, disbelief, and dawning horror as he realized the implications. $75 million. Stephanie finally managed her voice, barely above a whisper. Yes, I confirmed. My company has been quite successful over the past 12 years. I should have mentioned it earlier, but it never seemed relevant to bring up. But your house, your car, Thomas stammered. I prefer to live simply, I explained. Money doesn't change who you are. It just reveals who others are. I turned to the assembled guests with a gracious smile. In celebration of Thomas and Stephanie's marriage, I'd like to announce a wedding gift. I've arranged for an all-expenses-paid trip around the world for the newlyweds. First-class flights, 5-star accommodations, and VIP experiences on every continent. The private jet is scheduled for whenever they're ready to depart. Stephanie's expression transformed instantly, from shock to delight. That's incredibly generous, she gushed, suddenly warm and friendly. Thomas always said, you were amazing, didn't you, darling? Thomas couldn't meet my eyes. He understood exactly what had happened, that I had witnessed his true character when he thought I was of no financial consequence. The Howards quickly recalibrated their approach. William clapped me on the shoulder, like we were old friends. Constance, we simply must talk business sometime. I had no idea you were so accomplished. Margaret suddenly found space for me at the main table. You must sit with the family, of course. There's so much we should discuss. Throughout the brunch, I maintained my composure, accepting congratulations on my surprise revelation with grace. I chatted pleasantly with guests who had previously ignored me watching, as the social dynamics shifted dramatically now that I was known to be wealthy. Toward the end of the event, Thomas finally managed to get me alone. Mom, why didn't you tell me? He asked, his voice a mixture of hurt and embarrassment. All these years, I had no idea. Would it have mattered? I asked gently. Should it matter? Of course not, but it clearly does. I finished for him. Thomas, I watched you this weekend. I saw you stand by while I was seated in the back rows, excluded from family photos, denied a toast at your wedding. Not once did you stand up for me. It was complicated, he protested weakly. Stephanie's family has expectations, connections that are important for my career. And those matter more than how your mother is treated. He had no answer to that. The money changed how they see me, I said softly. But it changed how I see you. The son I raised would never value wealth over character, appearances, over kindness. Thomas's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, Mom. I got caught up in it all. Their lifestyle, their world. I didn't realize how badly they were treating you. Yes, you did. I corrected him gently. You simply decided it was acceptable collateral damage for your ambitions. Before he could respond, Stephanie appeared, her arm sliding possessively through his. Connie, I hope we can start fresh, she said with a newly respectful tone. I'd love for you to help us find our first home. With your real estate expertise, you must know all the exclusive neighborhoods. I'll be happy to offer advice when you're ready, I replied neutrally. William approached next business card extended. We should discuss potential partnerships. The Howards have extensive holdings that might complement your portfolio. I accepted his card with a polite smile. That's very kind. I'll have my team review possibilities. The remainder of the brunch passed in a blur of newfound respect and transparent attempts to establish connections to my wealth. The same people who had dismissed me a day earlier now hung on my every word, laughed at my mildest jokes, and made plans for future gatherings. Only two people's behavior remained unchanged. Jake Thomas's groomsman, who had shown me kindness when he thought I was just a retired teacher, and Sophia, the catering staff member, who had comforted me in the bathroom. Neither had attended the brunch, but as I was leaving, I made sure to leave envelopes for both of them. Recommendations and seed funding for Sophia's catering business dream, and an invitation for Jake to interview at my company if he was ever interested. As I drove away from the Howard estate, I felt no triumph in my revelation, only a mixture of sadness and clarity. The weekend had shown me exactly who valued human dignity, regardless of wealth, and who saw people merely as stepping stones or obstacles to their ambitions. The hardest lesson was seeing which category my own son had chosen. 6 months have passed since Thomas's wedding, and my life has settled into a new reality. I sit in my office, overlooking the city skyline, reviewing proposals for our newest development project. The floor-to-ceiling windows reflect my image, a confident woman in her late 50s who no longer feels any need to hide her success or diminish herself for others' comfort. After the wedding weekend revelation, my phone nearly exploded with messages. Thomas called daily once he and Stephanie returned from the honeymoon I had gifted them. Their attitude had completely transformed. Suddenly, I was invited to dinner parties, introduced to their friends as Thomas's brilliant mother, the real estate mogul, and consulted on everything from investment opportunities to home decorating. Stephanie's parents became equally persistent, William sending weekly emails about potential business collaborations, and Margaret suggesting lunch dates to get to know each other properly. The transparency of their motivations was almost painful to witness. I maintained a polite but distant relationship with all of them. I accepted occasional dinner invitations, but declined most business propositions. I sent appropriate gifts for birthdays and anniversaries, but didn't initiate gatherings. I was unfailingly civil, but no longer vulnerable. 3 months after the wedding, I met with my estate attorney to revise my will. After careful consideration, I decided that the majority of my wealth would go to a foundation supporting education and housing for single parents. I established a modest trust for Thomas, with specific conditions about community service and demonstrated values, not just financial milestones. The money would be there for him, but he would need to show he had reclaimed the character his father and I had tried to instill. More satisfying than any business success have been the genuine relationships I've developed. Sophia, the kind catering staff member, used the seed funding I provided to start her own small business, specializing in high-quality, affordable catering for community events. I became her first client, hiring her company for my office's holiday party. Her authentic gratitude and determination remind me of myself at a younger age. Jake Thomas's groomsman, who showed me kindness at the wedding, initially had no idea I had recommended him for a position at one of my subsidiary companies. He was hired based on his own merits and has thrived in the role. When he eventually learned of my connection, he sent a simple thank you note that said, "Your son told me stories about the values you taught him. I see now where his original kindness came from. I hope he finds his way back to those lessons." I've started volunteering at a grief support group, sharing my experiences of rebuilding life after losing Robert. There, among people who know nothing of my financial status, I've found a community of authentic connections based on shared human experience rather than monetary value. In a strange way, The wedding weekend's painful revelations freed me. For years, I had maintained my modest lifestyle, partly out of habit, partly from connection to the past, but also from fear that people would value my money rather than me. The wedding confirmed this fear, but also showed me that such people reveal themselves eventually, regardless of what I do. As for Thomas, our story took an unexpected turn. 4 months after the wedding, Stephanie filed for divorce. Once the excitement of spending my wedding gift wore off, she discovered that Thomas wasn't actually the ticket to social advancement she had hoped for. Without his connection to me, and with Thomas showing increasing discomfort with her superficial values, she quickly lost interest. The divorce humbled him. 2 weeks after Stephanie moved out, Thomas appeared at my door, not at my office, but at the family home he had once dismissed as embarrassingly modest. He came without warning, carrying the old photo album I had given him years ago, filled with childhood memories and pictures of his father. "I got lost, Mom," he said, simply, his voice breaking. "I forgot who I was, who we were. I'm so ashamed of how I treated you." We talked for hours that night, painful, honest conversations about values, choices, and second chances. I didn't immediately forgive him. Real reconciliation requires accountability. But I opened the door to rebuilding our relationship on more authentic terms. Over these past months, Thomas has been working to rediscover his original path. He left his position at the prestigious firm he had joined to impress the Howards and started working with a nonprofit focused on affordable housing. Ironically, one that my foundation supports, though he applied without using my name. Our Sunday dinners have resumed, though, with a new awareness between us. Sometimes we talk business, sometimes personal matters, but always with an honesty that was missing before. He's dating again a kindergarten teacher, with a quick laugh and zero interest in social climbing. The experience has taught me profound lessons about wealth, respect, and authentic relationships. Money doesn't change who you are at your core, but it often reveals who others are when they interact with you. True respect can't be bought. It's earned through character consistency and genuine care for others, regardless of their status. I still live relatively modestly, though I've allowed myself a few meaningful luxuries. I donated Robert's old armchair to a veterans center and bought myself a beautiful new one that better suits my current self. I upgraded my car not to impress others, but because I deserve reliability and comfort. Small changes that acknowledge my success without letting it define me. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have revealed your wealth earlier, kept it secret forever, or handled things differently with your child? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you've experienced family transformations of your own, share your story. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in these journeys is the greatest comfort. If you found value in my experience, please subscribe and hit the like button. I'll be sharing more stories about navigating family relationships, building success on your own terms, and finding authentic connections in a world often obsessed with appearances. Remember, your worth isn't determined by your bank account. It's measured by how you treat others when you think no one is watching. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you relationships built on genuine respect rather than superficial values.